Good evening, students of Conversation 3. I should say good night, but it doesn't sound right to start a lecture by saying good night. It's pretty late, but I would like to get this done. This is the last makeup lecture of the semester to make up for the first 2 weeks that we missed. This is the last textbook, the last chapter in this textbook, and the last chapter in the textbooks that I've used for conversation this semester. So this is a milestone, I guess. And this is one of my favorite chapters, which actually, the truth is, normally we don't progress through the textbook so quickly, so often I don't actually do all 10 chapters, but because a little bit more structure and having topics that are right in front of you when we're doing things online has made it so that I didn't choose any topics apart from the ones that are given in the textbook this semester. But normally I throw in a few of my own, usually once a month, just to give some variety. And we have presentations which take up a lot of time in class, so we end up doing like 8 chapters. But because of the way things went with no midterm and so on, we're at the end of the book. So just to get everyone up to speed, there was a lecture for all 3 conversation classes combined earlier this week. I hope you watched that. This is actually week 11 because our makeup class was the last one to be done. So week 12 is already done, and the presentation guidelines are uploaded. And I just wanted to say that I didn't really mention in the guidelines about what topic you should choose for your presentation. One student submitted theirs already, which is really early because you don't have to submit it until June 5th, but it would be great if they would come in anytime. You can do them anytime over the next 2 weeks and send them to me, and then I can do them slowly instead of having an avalanche of 80 presentations in one day. That's going to be hard to manage anyway, so if I can spread it out, that would be better. So you can finish it anytime. Just, I was going to do this yesterday, and then I did this today. There's a little bit of flexibility built into this course design. This is for you as well as for me. So the last possible day is June 5th, though. You can't hand it in later than that because I'm going to have to cut it off and process everything and grade everything. So. And we're going to get into exams after that, so you've got to finish it in 2 weeks, okay? Now, I didn't mention about choosing the topics. It's a 5-minute to 8-minute thing. 5 minutes at the very least, like I said, so more like 6. Don't cut it too close, because it shouldn't be 5 minutes and 1 second. You need to choose a topic that's appropriate for university, especially if you're Conversation 3. Just choose a specific topic that's advanced and either explain it to me or demonstrate it to me, or like I said, if you have some editing skills and everything and you want to integrate some music, go ahead. But again, you have to be in front of the camera for part of it, like I am. If you're in front of the camera for the whole time, that's fine, but there has to be at least half of it that where I actually see your face and I can see your body language and I can see you speaking. If you have props, that's fine. I don't care about the background. I'm interested in what you say and how you say it, okay? So, I didn't have this whiteboard and I didn't know where I was going to even record my lectures originally. I'm not concerned about that. You don't need a studio. You don't need a professional camera. Try to make sure that I can hear you. I have some good speakers so I can crank it up. But just do your best considering what technology you have, and I'm going to judge you based on what you say and how you say it, not how expensive your environment is, okay? So you can choose whatever you want, just make sure that it's not a really simple, childish topic. That having been said, today we're going to talk about monsters, which some students would probably say, well, why are we talking about monsters? Well, you can be childish in your approach to something, and the topic itself is not necessarily childish. People love monsters. Horror films are not childish, right? Those movies are designed for adults, and actually they're restricted for for children. So those are not childish monsters. It just depends on how you approach it. I would say Dracula is a fairly high level novel. You would read that in high school. And Dracula is one of the classic monsters. So we're going to discuss monsters today. It's something I like to talk about because I was a literature major, and one of the reasons that I became an English professor eventually was because when I was a kid, my mother read books to me, and in those books there was always monsters. Often those monsters represented things. One of the books that my mother read to me when I was young, before I could read novels myself, was the Narnia Chronicles, which Koreans usually don't talk about the specific books, they just call it Narnia. The world of Narnia that was created by C.S. Lewis, and in particular the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Me and my brother had my mother read that all the way through more than once. We requested it again. And I must have been 6 years old, probably grade 1 or grade 2. I was learning to read, and that was way too advanced for me to handle. So she read that novel to me, and that jump-started my interest in reading, which had a lot to do with dragons and lions and witches and wardrobes at the beginning. And it evolved into all kinds of other interests from there. Now my preference, in the corner you can't really see that well, but a lot of these books are Korean history books in the top corner down here, and below that it's American and British, because that's one of the classes I teach. And one of the reasons I like to teach that class is because I like to read these books anyway. So it worked out well for me to integrate my personal hobbies and my job. So it's nice sometimes to do these topics. You can treat them more seriously though, which we will attempt to do, because there is a lot of this in reality. There is a lot of belief in these creatures, not just in past cultures, but believe it or not, there's a lot of talk about these kind of things now, still, in a lot of places, and it's a surprisingly broad topic, which has millions and millions of people that still subscribe to these sort of myths and legends, right? And they don't have to be from 1,000 years ago. They can be from yesterday. So the chapter itself is called Beastly Things, but our title is A Monster Mash, because that's just a funny song that we sing at Halloween. And Halloween is one of the days where we put on costumes and everybody pretends to be monsters. In the book, though, they start out by talking about mythical beasts, beasts that are based on really old stories like Greek and Roman mythology, and from other cultures too, Norse mythology or countries in Asia. Chinese mythology goes way back as well, and so as does Korean. There's a movie that I can't really recommend. It's called D-War. I saw it on opening night because I was really interested in watching a sci-fi fantasy Korean film when I first came to Korea. This is probably 2009. It's a Korean sci-fi fantasy. You know, it was meant to be a blockbuster, but it kind of flopped. But the main, the beast that has to be overcome, the whole story revolves around this myth of the Imugi. Right? I'm not even sure how to call that thing. It's a serpent, snake, dragon type monster, and that was a Korean myth, which got changed into a movie, which Shim Hyung-rae, I think, was the director, who was a former comedian. He made an effort to try and turn it into a science fiction movie, but it didn't really go that well, to be honest. But that's a good example. The dragon that you see poking its head out of the top of the chapter, at the top of chapter 10 there, that guy is an Asian type dragon with those kind of features, and it resembles the Imugi that was in the movie somewhat. So these monsters usually have certain characteristics. They get incorporated into a story in order to make a point. And the point of the Imugi, I guess, is every 500 years it comes around and there's an evil one and a good one, and you have to see if the good one's going to win, and then or the evil one, and then it's going to have control over the spirit world that's linked to the earth for the next, you know, period, something like that. I'm not completely clear on the details because it was not explained in detail in the movie, but there's other mythical beasts that have similar sort of characteristics, like the phoenix burns down and then it resurrects itself, and that's so then when you invoke that word in conversation or you use that as a symbol, the phoenix becomes a symbol of rebirth because it dies by fire and then it was reborn in the same form afterwards. One of my favorite mythical beasts is the Sphinx, which is the body of a lion and the head of a person. And in the Greek myths, they ask a riddle, and then if you can't answer the riddle, then they eat you or destroy your city or your community. And if you answer it correctly, they kill themselves. So all of these beasts usually have distinct features and they have characteristics that lend themselves to the stories, and they have some sort of lesson or creation story involved in them, and that's why they've survived, because we attributed them to certain situations or origins over time, and so we kept those stories going down the years, and that's why they're still famous now, and we see them appear in movies, and you see references in writing, in newspapers, or on the internet. People use these stories all the time. On the second page, they're referring to Bigfoot. And you may not be familiar with Bigfoot because that's more of a North American thing. It's like a gigantic, hairy, bear ape kind of creature, which shambles around in the forest and the mountains in the northern part of Canada or United States. Sometimes they call him a Sasquatch. And, he never actually fully appears, and people never get a really good look at him. There's always sort of pictures of something, the out of focus, or a footprint, or the back of some big, tall, 10-foot tall, humanoid looking thing. Bigfoot has come to represent something that might be there, could be there, but never fully appears, and might not actually exist in reality. Like I wrote down at the bottom of the board there, what I mean by quasi-real is quasi means kind of partially or almost, and I don't mean quasi-realism because that's another thing related to linguistics, but just saying something is quasi-real, just in the basic sense of anything being quasi, means it's apparently but not fully true. Apparently there in some sense, but not in a real sense. So you can say quasi-scientific, and quasi-scientific means not real science, essentially. So Bigfoot is a monster, but he's not a real monster. He's just something that kind of exists on the edges of people's imagination, and that's it. The Loch Ness, there's a picture there beside Bigfoot of the Loch Ness Monster, and beside that they have a platypus. Now, you can't choose to talk about, in the interview question when I ask you, talk about some sort of strange beast, it has to be an imaginary one. And the platypus is not imaginary, although it looks like it could be, or should be, because they talk about a griffin, and I talked about the Sphinx. Some of these creatures are like half man, half horse, like a centaur, or, half eagle, half lion, like a griffin, or even more, like a chimera has a bunch of different animals mixed together. Those are typical sort of Greek type imaginary creatures, and they are not real, none of them. But a platypus looks like it is kind of part beaver, part seal, part duck somehow, and it is real. So there are exceptions to every rule, I guess. When you get something that looks as weird as a platypus, I'm sure people were didn't believe when somebody reported the first platypus. Nobody believed that that was actually real. But then again, a long time ago, when Europeans first went to Africa and somebody said they saw a hippopotamus, how would you describe that if you've never seen a hippopotamus? Like it's a giant pig with an enormous mouth that is unstoppable, and it's got super thick skin, and it's stronger than a horse, or similar to an elephant, but it's short and stocky. And if you hadn't seen an elephant before, I mean, the first time when Europeans encountered elephants too, they were just amazed at the size and the power and essentially the monstrosity, the extreme characteristics of that animal. So it was hard for people to believe it about these things like giraffes and hippopotamus and elephants, that they'd never seen them before. So the African animals seemed like imaginary beasts to people who had never visited those countries. We grow up learning about dinosaurs, so we don't really think that African animals are monsters. We just think they're really cool animals. But you get the idea that certain types of animals are extreme. Their body type and their characteristics are very extreme, so they do resemble something that would be from your imagination more than it might be from real life. So just like the other topics, you should make a choice. And topic choice is very important. It's not because you need to choose something that I necessarily like. You may have noticed that if you wrote about some person that I also, for whatever reason, I know very well, or I'm familiar with because of my own interest, I may have commented, "Oh, I'm surprised that you like that person too," or "How did you know about that person?" or "That was really interesting." That doesn't have anything really to do with your grade, other than the fact that you did a good job of talking about that person, and I know that person really well. Or if it was related to another thing, another hobby or interest, then I might have commented on that. But that's not because that's related to your grade. I'm just making comments because I have first-hand knowledge about the certain thing you decided to talk about. So it's not your job necessarily to choose something that your audience likes, whether it's your professor or whether it's a group of people. But I always tell my students, when we do this presentation in class, everybody's the same age as you. Mostly Korean, but there's some international students too. So choose something that everybody could be interested in. That's all. It doesn't have to be everybody's favorite thing. That's what happens when we do these topics. We're finally through all these different topics, and you might not like this one, and you might not like half of them, but some of these topics are more practical, and some of them are more abstract, and some of them have more relevancy to your personal life, and some of them are naturally more interesting because that's something you like already. So talking about it is easier, right? But that's the way it is when you make a conversation, and this is the way it is when you prepare a presentation, is that you have to, if you know the information about your audience, then just choose a topic that they could be interested in, and that gives you a better chance of keeping the attention of everyone. So people have chosen topics for their presentations that have been a little bit outside the experience of freshmen or seniors. In your case, most of you are second year or above for Conversation 3. So choosing topics that would be more down a young person's alley. You might not want to talk about, for example, childcare or being pregnant or something like that, right? This might be not the stage in your life where everybody's thinking about that. If you were talking to a group of people in their 30s, like me, I'm also almost out of my 30s, sadly. But if you were talking to young couples that were in their 30s, those things would be very relevant, like, managing a household and shopping for healthy food and taking care of your children and pregnancy. Those kind of things would be naturally a good choice for somebody that age, or not, but especially if the class was full of married couples, then it would be a natural choice for any of those topics to be chosen. But that would be a disaster for the most part. It would be not the right type of choice to keep the room interested of 19-year-olds. At least that was the case when I was 19. So you know yourself, and you know your friends. You know the culture of university life. So choose something that's a topic that most of you would be interested in listening to, and try to be serious and analytical about it, like I taught you, and give examples and be specific. I'm really looking for good conversation flow, so I don't want too much hesitation, and I don't want too much reading either. So you need to start, introduce, give a summary or detail, provide an explanation or example, and then after the 2 minutes are over, then you're done. I am going to talk about the exam and how you're going to be evaluated. There's going to be a exam guideline file uploaded as well for you, and there's going to be a lecture this week. Week 13 will also be a combined lecture for all the conversation classes, and then we will split into conversation 1, 2, and 3 again to handle the exam review on week 14. And then I get to see you finally, which will be a bit of a shock for all of you. Unfortunately, you don't get to get comfortable talking to me at all, but that's the way it is. So it's a cold interview. You're going to come in. Some of you I know, actually, because this is conversation 3, but most of you are going to come in, and some of you are going to see me for the first time, and I'm going to say good morning, and you'll say good morning, and then I'll ask you your questions, and I'll say thank you very much, and then it'll be summer vacation. And that's how the final is going to go. There's good things and bad things to that, but again, I'll go over the exam stuff in more detail for the entire group at the same time, because you're all going to have similar instructions, just conversation 3 is more advanced, so it's more competitive, and the topics generally are more difficult to handle. Okay? So for this topic, it doesn't matter if you choose something that's a classical myth or legend. It doesn't matter if it's something from fantasy, or it's something that's from science fiction, or it's aliens, which some people believe in aliens and they think there's some evidence of that. So you only have 2 minutes though, so beware. You can't go into a whole lot of detail, so you have to get to the point quite quickly. Just choose one of these things, and you just have to explain to me, like I did, a short little explanation about what Bigfoot is and what he represents and why people are interested in him. That's how you approach the topic. If you want to choose a legend that has a story and you can compact that story into about a minute or so, then you can tell a story. So as usual, you have a certain number of options. And like I said, you may think that this topic is not that serious, and in some respects it's not, because it's not going to make you money. But I have students, English students actually, who are interested in being writers, and I do sometimes remind students that although your parents want you to be super serious and be a lawyer, government officer, doctor, teacher, or some traditional stable job, that's normally what Korean parents are looking for, and I understand because I'm a parent too. You want something stable, but the reality of the job market and the way things are going with robots and automation and everything is creativity. I believe firmly that creativity is going to be not less valuable, at the very least down the road it's going to be more valuable, and that the options for doing things that involve human creativity and interaction will increase, not decrease. Because robots can replace us doing almost anything, but human beings do crave interaction with each other, and there's certain elements of human behavior that robots have a lot of trouble imitating, and the creative aspect of us is one of those things. So if you like this stuff, be creative and enjoy it, and if you don't, then I know, it's tough medicine, but be a little bit creative. Even if you're a business person, it's good for you. Okay, so if you want to pursue something, journalism, writing, whether it's creative writing or other types of writing, or you're just trying to improve your language skills, this is a good topic for you to do some research, find out about some alien landing in the United States, in Nevada. Or I had a student last time I taught this class, which was a couple of years ago. I had a student explain to me that apparently there was, in Chosun, there was some unexplained simultaneous events in multiple cities in Korea, and still unexplained. And some people think that during the Chosun period there was aliens that touched down in multiple Korean towns and villages at the same time, and there's no other way to explain that these people saw these strange objects moving up and down in the sky, and it was hundreds of years ago, so it wasn't a helicopter. What could it have been? It must have been aliens. Okay, so use your imagination and tell me about some sort of creature, whether it's magical, scientific, quasi-real, aliens. That's your choice. That's the flexibility that's built into most of the questions. So that is the end of the book. Thank you for listening as usual. Like I said, we'll have a group lecture one more time, and then we'll split into our own exam reviews, and then we will have the final. So this is your last assignment as well. There are a few students that jump the gun, and jump the gun I mean not by jumping on a gun or shooting a gun. It's just a metaphor, meaning that you already handed in an assignment. If you handed in a 7th assignment based on chapter 7, I think one student handed in, you know who you are, I can't remember, but somebody handed in on spending and saving, on budgeting. If you did that and you've handed in 7 assignments already, then you're good. I just wanted one more submitted after the original 6, right? That's the whole thing. So everybody needs to do a 7th one. So if you haven't done it yet, it's due next Friday, and it's on imaginary creatures. And you need to send that to me with the subject line and your class and your name and your student number like usual. But if you've already done it, the 7th, 8th, or 9th week, sorry, it's not the 7th, it's the 7th chapter, 7, 8, or 9, or the 8th, 9th, or 10th week. If you've already handed in a 7th assignment, you can hand in another one, or you can just take a break, and you don't have to hand in the last one, okay? So I'm aware that few people handed them in, and thank you for practicing. But like I said, if you handed in 7, then you're complete. You've done all the assignments you need to this semester, okay? Remember, the presentation is due at the latest June 5th. You can send me emails as usual. I'm slower at getting back to emails sometimes than usual because of the volume, but most of you probably know I get back to you within 24 hours usually. So if you have questions about the presentation, refer to the guidelines first. Make sure you look at all the instructions, and if you still have questions, then you're welcome to ask me, and I can clarify. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good night, and see you again next week.